else we will continue to lose the confidence of the American people. I thank the Chair and will yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to speak as if in morning business for 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today I rise to discuss the National Flood Insurance Program, which is a program that is trying to be reauthorized right now by the Senate. The Senators Johnson and Shelby have shepherded this bill through the Banking Committee. Have a ton of respect for both those senators and the work of the Banking Committee because they worked very, very hard to get it to the floor, to get it ready. In fact, it expires on May 31st, and if for some reason we cannot work out something here in the next couple of days, I sincerely hope that we will extend this on at least a short-term basis for another, say, 30 days and give us time to work this out because the National Flood Insurance Program is too important to mortgages and commercial real estate, et cetera, to let it lapse. We should not let it lapse, and if we can't work it out right now, I certainly hope that we can get say, a 30-day extension, and I support that effort. We need to reauthorize this bit of legislation, this program, but we need to do it in the right way. Several senators over the course of the last few months have stated objections about S-1940, and here are mine. In fact, I've listed out some of mine in a letter that we sent to the chairman and ranking member last month or so. I'll have to pull the letter. Let's see. I'm sorry, November 15 of 2011. We listed out several objections that we had or concerns we had with the bill. The 13 senators from 9 states who signed this letter going to Senators Johnson and Shelby. Again, we appreciate their efforts, but we just have to do this the right way. So let me run through 3 or 4 or 5 of my concerns about this legislation and tell my colleagues why I cannot support it in its current form and why I do support an extension, but why in the end, if the bill stays like it is now, I cannot support it, and I hope that many of my colleagues will join me in the effort of not supporting this legislation as it's currently drafted. Let me start, Mr. President, with the bill itself, S-1940. The primary objection that I have is in Section 107 of the legislation. It's called mandatory coverage areas. Basically what it does is it redefines special flood hazard areas, and this may not sound very exciting or very fun to people, but this is critically important. I'm showing a map here on the floor today. All of these counties in the dark green, there's 881 counties total that have levees in their counties. 881 counties total. It's about, my understanding, about well over 50% of the U.S. population has lived somewhere near a levee. They may not realize it because the levees work and they don't have floods, but if you see this map, you can see the levees all over the country. And if you're a senator representing one of those states, I would strongly encourage you and your staff to look at Section 107 of the legislation. Here's part of, this is 107B, and it says residual risk areas. The regulations required by subsection A shall require the expansion of areas of special flood hazards to include areas of residual risk that are located behind levees, near dams, or other flood control structures as determined by the administrator. Subsection C says mandatory participation in National Flood Insurance Program. C1, in general, any area described in subsection B, the one I just read, shall be subject to the mandatory purchase requirements. Okay? Then if I go down to C, subparagraph 3, it says, in carrying out the mandatory purchase requirement under paragraph 1, the administrator shall ensure that the price of flood insurance policies in areas of residual risk accurately reflect the level of flood protection provided by any levee, dam, or other flood control structure in such area regardless of the certification status of the flood control structure. So regardless of whether these levees and dams are certified, in many cases by the Corps of Engineers, in other cases by private engineering firms, regardless of whether they are certified, the people behind those levees are going to be required to purchase flood insurance. And let me just read that one more time. It says, regulations required by subsection A shall require. Shall require. There's no wiggle room there. Shall require the expansion of areas of special flood hazards to include these areas. Mr. President, this is a great expansion of this program. I want to talk about the expansion here in just a moment. But let me say that the folks in these areas, and I know it's certainly true in my state of Arkansas, but the people in these areas, they currently pay for flood protection. In most cases, what they do is through some sort of local levy or local tax. You know, it's different in different places, but somehow, some way, they pay to build and maintain these levees. They are paying out of their pocket right now to make sure that they don't get flooded. Now, what this bill does and what FEMA would do under this bill, they'd be required to do it, wouldn't have any wiggle room. What they'd be required to do under this bill is make them pay again. Not only do they have to pay for their own levy, they're also going to have to pay flood insurance for floods that will never happen in their areas because these levees are certified. Again, this is 881 counties, 50% of the U.S. population. Over half the counties in Arkansas have levees, and there's over 1,200 dams in our state. I don't have the number of dams for everybody all over the country, but it's over 1,200 in my state, so you can multiply that out by how many dams you might think there are in the U.S. It's a huge number, and it's going to affect, you know, well over half the people in the United States. So I mentioned that these folks are already paying for their own flood protection through local levees. They also are going to now, according to this law, have to pay for insurance. But in addition to that, to rub salt in the wounds, what they're going to have to do is they're going to also, their local counties also going to have to pass an ordinance that FEMA has written, and it's going to restrict the land use. And in many cases, that ordinance will diminish the property values, diminish the ability for them to do development, economic development in their communities. If we can just take one example of something that happened last year. Last year, we had terrible flooding in the midsection of the country. Many of you all remember that. The Corps of Engineers ended up having to blow the levee at Bird's Point. That's part of the Corps of Engineers Mississippi River and tributary system. By the way, we need to thank the Corps of Engineers and praise them for the engineering they've done on this river. I know there's been a few problems here and there over the years. Some obviously happened in Katrina. But overall, the Corps of Engineers, they design things that work. And certainly, when you look at last year, the 2011 flood of last year, in the Mississippi River, you know, one of the longest rivers in the world, certainly the longest in North America, there was more water flow through the gauging stations along the Mississippi River from Cairo, Illinois to Natchez, Mississippi, than any flood in recorded history. The flow at Cairo, Illinois, the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio, was over 2 million cubic feet per second. 2 million cubic feet a second was running through the Mississippi River right there. In Helena, Arkansas, it was running at 2.3 million cubic feet a second. Now, at some locations, the Corps of Engineers is in the process of determining this. They're not ready to say it yet. But in some locations up and down the Mississippi River system, they are considering whether this actually was not a 100-year flood or the 250-year flood. This was actually a 500-year flood, the largest flood in history. And all of this Mississippi River MR&T, as we call it, Mississippi River and tributary system, all that has cost our taxpayers, let's see, $32 billion since its inception. $32 billion. But just in the flood last year, it saved taxpayers $110 billion in damages. That's a great return on investment. We need to honor that return on investment. We need to not charge people an additional flood insurance for areas that don't flood. They just maybe had the 500-year flood up and down the Mississippi, or at least in certain parts of it, and there was not 1 acre of ground that went underwater. It was a new flood of record. 10 million acres of land were protected. 1 million structures were protected. And again, it prevented $110 billion of property damage. There were no lives lost. Not 1 acre was flooded, and the system worked exactly according to plan. So now this bill comes in and says, well, even though we just had, the 250-year or the 500-year flood, still, we want to make all these people up and down the Mississippi and all these counties, we want to make them, not all the people, but in certain parts of these counties, depending on what the flood maps say, we want to require them to pay flood insurance when it's never going to flood there. So I want my colleagues to know that this provision, Section 107 in the Senate bill, is not in the House bill. It's not in the House bill. So I think the reason it's not, I can't speak for the House, of course, but I think the reason it's not is for the reasons I'm saying right here. We know that it's not going to flood in these areas. This is the Corps of Engineers flood. This is the best levee system in the world, and it's keeping these folks safe and dry when the floods come. Now, also I wanted to say that the House does not have Section 107 in their bill. It never did. Also, there was a House amendment offered by Congressman Cardoza who took out a requirement to show that these areas be on their maps, and that vote passed 261 to 163. So again, not only can we get consistent with the House because we can get rid of 107, but we can also get rid of other specific parts of this legislation that will be more consistent with the House. Another thing I want to talk about with regard to this bill, oh, by the way, one more thing, Mr. President, before I go completely away from this map. Here's a map of the Mississippi River, the area that I'm talking about, and you see the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Missouri, and a little bit of Kentucky and Illinois in there as well. But this right here, this large blue area, is what they call the historic floodplain. So before man came, before people started building levees, before they started draining swamps and trying to manage the land, this is the area that would flood. One thing that's important to know about this is a lot of this area in this light blue is some of the richest farmland in the world. And the reason it's so rich is because for centuries or eons or however long it was, this river would flood periodically and put this very, very rich soil out there. That's one reason why in this part of the country you can grow almost anything. That soil is great. It's a huge industry for this area that we keep it going, and it's also critically important for U.S. trade and the U.S. economy that we have this is the breadbasket, so to speak, of the U.S. right here, that we have that area growing food and fiber for everyone. It's critical that we keep that going. Now, once the Corps of Engineers gets hold of the Mississippi River, this is what it looks like now when it floods. This is now the floodplain. And so if you go back to last year when it flooded so bad, this is what it looked like. With one exception, they blew out this one little area in Bird's Point up here somewhere to give a little bit of relief. And again, that was by design, and that worked. So the first problem I have with the bill is Section 107. Another problem is just the general expansion of what this bill does to the National Flood Insurance Program. One of the things that's buried in the bill that a lot of people may not see is in Section 118. Section 118 talks about how the administrator needs to establish an ongoing program under which they review and update and maintain National Flood Insurance Program rate maps in accordance with this section, et cetera, et cetera. And then it goes down their criteria of what they need to look at. One is all populated areas in areas of possible population growth located within, not the 100-year floodplain, not the 100-year, because that's what the current law is, 100-year floodplain. Nope. What this bill says is the 500-year floodplain. the 500-year floodplain. We don't have a map of that because the Corps of Engineers has not finished mapping and FEMA hasn't accepted all those maps yet. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to look something like this right here. And I don't know exactly, but you can bet your bottom dollar that a lot of people in these areas, this light blue area, are going to have to pay flood insurance. And based on the flood we just had last year, they are never going to get flooded. Not in 100 years, not in 500 years. They will never get flooded, but this law requires that they purchase flood insurance. This is a huge expansion of the program. And it has a big impact, not just on homeowners. That's obviously very important. You're not going to be able to get a mortgage if you're in a floodplain. You know, when it says, when this law says in its let me pull the section right here, Mr. President. When this law says in its in the committee report that notice will be provided to property owners in the 500-year floodplain to inform them of their flood risks, which may lead to more owners protecting their property through flood insurance.
Senator has used his 15 minutes.
Mr. President, I would ask that I would have 5 more minutes to wrap up.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, what this says in the committee language, in the committee report, it says that the 500-year flood notation should be sent out to everyone so everyone knows that this property is in a 500-year floodplain. The problem there is folks are not going to be able to get mortgage insurance. They're not going to be able to do real estate development. Commercial real estate is going to hurt from that. You're not going to be able to have economic development projects in these areas because of the floodplain notation. Also, on page 8 of the committee report, it talks about how this is they're going to spend about $400 million annually in doing this mapping. Well, if you're going to map out to the 500-year floodplain, that's a heck of a lot more mapping than just the 100-year floodplain. So you can save quite a bit of money by doing that. Mr. President, the bottom line is these levees are designed correctly, they're built correctly, they're maintained correctly, and they're certified that they're safe. And so what's the point of having people come and do more flood insurance in that area when it's not required right now? Mr. President, my last point is this. I also think this legislation requires a huge conflict of interest for FEMA. It's not FEMA's fault. They're not asking for this. It's what the Congress is trying to do. Basically, under this law, FEMA would write the regs, they'd draw the lines, they would control the timing, they'd set the standards, they'd update the maps, they'd maintain the maps. If there's an appeal, you'd have to go to FEMA. They set the rates, they collect the money, they spend the money. Everything is done by FEMA. Obviously, FEMA is going to have an interest to make sure this program is adequately funded and solvent, and they should, but they have control of every aspect of this with no checks and balances in this system. And there are going to be, again, millions and millions of people who are going to pay in to make this solvent, I guess, but that will never need flood insurance. So, Mr. President, with that, I'd just like to say that I would hope my colleagues who have counties in these states here that represent these states, when they look at Section 107, they will see what I see, and we could all work together to either take out Section 107 completely or at least get the 30-day extension where we could have time to take it out in the next few days. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. That the majority leader be recognized at 4 p.m.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President?
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that my remarks be placed in an appropriate place in the record and that I be permitted to finish my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we find ourselves in the midst of a presidential election. In years past, it might have been expected that during a presidential election, politics would take precedent over policy. That was not right then, but it is certainly not right now. Our nation faces serious problems, immediate problems, and we cannot wait to tackle them until after the election. We are over $15.7 trillion in debt, and before the end of this year, it will be over $16 trillion. We have a tax code that is unmanageable and a burden on conscientious taxpayers. And if the President and Congress fail to act, we have a tax increase coming next year that will dwarf any in our nation's history. We cannot afford to wait another 7 months to get our fiscal house in order, and we need to act now. President Obama at least claims to understand that we cannot wait to address this fiscal crisis. He remarked recently that the fact that this is an election year is not an excuse for inaction. Unfortunately, other than talk, the President and his liberal allies have done nothing to address either our rising debt or the fiscal cliff that we are quickly approaching, both of which are significantly hindering our economic recovery and job growth. Last week, President Obama's budget received 0 votes in the United States Senate. For the second year in a row, every Republican and every Democrat who voted on the President's budget voted against it. And remarkably, not one Democrat voted for the serious Republican budgets offered by my friend Chairman Paul Ryan and my friends and colleagues, Senators Toomey, Paul, and Lee. While he talks a big game, President Obama has shown little interest in lighting a meaningful path towards balancing the budget, reforming the tax code, and reducing the tax burden on working families and small businesses. Instead, President Obama seems to have a single-minded focus on his re-election. But while he attempts to scare up votes in swing states, Americans across the country are suffering due to President Obama's failed economic policies. The people of Utah and the people across the country are naturally growing restless. They look to Europe and see the consequences of out-of-control spending and taxes. Yet even with the example of Europe, the President and his friends resist meaningful spending cuts at every turn, and his liberal allies have done everything they can to mislead the public about the responsible intentions of Republicans to reduce wasteful government spending. Just as critical for our economy is the President's failure to do anything to address the tax relief that will expire at the end of this year. If the President allows current tax relief to expire, the result will be at least a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people. You can call this a fiscal cliff. You can call it Tax-Mageddon, as others have done. Whatever you call it, it will be a disaster for the middle class. And it will be a disaster for small businesses. It will be the engine of our economic recovery. Now, one thing we hear time and time again from businesses is that uncertainty holds them back from investing, expanding, and hiring. A robust recovery will require permanent pro-growth tax policy, and given the continued jobs recession and weak economic growth, we need those policies now. Economic growth slowed to 2.2% last quarter. For 39 consecutive months, the unemployment rate has remained above 8%. But that only tells part of the story. 12.5 million Americans are unemployed, and of those, more than 5.1 million workers have been looking for work for 27 weeks or more. 7.9 million Americans are working part-time for economic reasons, and another 2.4 million have only a marginal attachment to the labor force. Close to 2 million college graduates are unemployed. Growth slowed to a tepid 2.2% rate in the first quarter, and we already saw business cut back. Investment as business investment spending declined 2.1% in the quarter. And yet the President and his Democratic allies seem content, even in this environment, to sit on the sidelines as Tax-Mageddon approaches and threatens even greater harm to our economy. The coming tax increases will be, without any exaggeration, the largest tax increases in American history. And the possibility of these tax increases is creating enormous uncertainty. The so-called business tax extenders expired at the end of 2011. Will there be an R&D tax credit in 2012? Will there be an exemption from, or an exception, from Subpart F for active financing income after 2011? Families and businesses do not know if the 2001 and 2003 tax relief will be extended beyond 2012. That creates tremendous uncertainty for anyone planning on buying a home, saving for college, investing in a new business, or hiring a new worker. Will pass-through organizations be taxed at 35% or 39.6%? Will dividends be taxed at 15%, or will dividends be taxed at 39.6%, as President Obama has proposed? Will there be a death tax that hits family businesses and farms with a maximum rate of 55%, or of 35%, or of something else? And what will happen to the alternative minimum tax? Will it be patched? Will it be reformed? Will it be repealed? Will it just be replaced with higher taxes somewhere else? The President and the Senate Democratic leadership have shown no willingness to answer these questions and provide the certainty that our economy craves. The adverse impact of these tax increases on economic growth is unquestioned. But don't take my word for it. It's been reported by the Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke. It has been reported that Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke recently discussed with Senate Democrats the significance of Tax-Mageddon. In short, the coming tax increases will be so large that Chairman Bernanke apparently warned that monetary policy would not be capable of offsetting the resulting decline in economic growth. Just last month, the Fed's policy-setting committee repeatedly warned in minutes of their meeting that fiscal uncertainty has negative effects on consumer and business sentiment, on household spending, on durable goods, on business capital expenditures, and on hiring. And the former director of President Obama's Office of Management and Budget concluded that what he estimates to be $500 billion tax increase would be so large that, quote, the economy could be thrown back into a recession, unquote. According to Barclays Capital, this fiscal cliff could reduce our GDP by 3%. And in addition to those looming tax hikes, budget cuts from the sequester that followed from the administration's failure to arrive at a budget are set to hit as well. According to the magazine The Economist, the Congressional Budget Office has found that the combined effects of the sequester and the expiring tax relief would add up to 3.6% of GDP in fiscal year 2013. Federal Reserve Governor Duke has reportedly indicated that the combined impact of expiring fiscal policies at the end of the year could amount to around 4% of the nation's economy. No economy can sustain such a hit without being hurled into a recession. Yet instead of addressing this fiscal cliff, tax increases that will harm all of America's families, the President seems content to pursue misguided micro-policies that target the so-called rich in the name of so-called fairness. I would like to make 2 points about the President's obsession with redistribution of wealth. First, the American people do not care. The American people do not want government bureaucrats in Washington figuring out who gets what. They don't want politicians spreading the wealth around. They don't want self-anointed arbiters of how much income is fair. What they want is the opportunity that comes with economic growth. They don't want a handout. They don't want their industries vilified for engaging in free enterprise. They want a job. And nothing is more fair than giving every American the chance to make something of himself or herself. That requires Washington getting out of the way, not getting more involved. Second, the American people seem to understand that the President's promise that he will only tax the rich is a sucker's bet. With his health care law, he already repeatedly broke his campaign promise not to raise taxes on families making less than $250,000 a year. And the people of Utah, my home state, and the rest of the other states know that the Democrats' thirst for more spending will require much more than taxes on the wealthy. If President Obama and his Democratic allies get their way, all taxpayers are going to be looking at bigger tax bills. President Clinton was honest on this point recently. He rejected President Obama's politically convenient claim that he would only tax the rich and called for across-the-board tax increases. Now, this is just me now. I'm not speaking for the White House. I think you could tax me at 100% and you would not balance the budget. We are all going to have to contribute to this, and if middle-class people's wages are going to go up again, and we had some growth to the economy, I don't think they would object to going back to tax rates from when I was president. There you have it. Tax increases on everybody. President Clinton can claim that he does not speak for the White House, but the American people are not fooled. They see where the president's policies are leading. Our debt and policies are leading. Our debt and deficits are unsustainable, but the president has shown no inclination to address them through spending reductions. There is only one other option available to President Obama, and is one that he and his party have shown to be their preferred policy for decades: higher taxes to pay for more spending. Utahns and Americans all over the country know that the failure to address Tax-Mageddon is a very real threat. We cannot put this discussion off any longer. It is time for our president to lead. To that end, last week, I, along with 40 of my Republican colleagues, sent a letter to our colleague and friend from Nevada, the Democratic leader, asking for him to address this fiscal cliff in short order. Today, we received a response. I have to say that I'm disappointed. While there's a great deal of political posturing about evil millionaires and big corporations, as well as repeated attacks on the Tea Party and the citizens who support its goals of smaller constitutional government, there is no acknowledgement of the fiscal cliff we are fast approaching. This response seems to confirm what we already know. President Obama and his liberal allies would prefer to put off a discussion of this fiscal cliff. They do not want to address Tax-Mageddon. I am fairly certain that their preference would be to get to the other side of the election and then have tax hikes set in, not only for their caricatured evil corporations and individuals, but for the middle class as well. But I'm confident that the markets and the American people are not going to allow this to happen. We cannot afford to delay action that will prevent Tax-Mageddon and steer us away from the coming fiscal cliff. The likelihood of Tax-Mageddon and the uncertainty it creates is an anchor around our economy. Americans young and old, unemployed and underemployed, want this anchor thrown off now. We cannot wait until next year or even a lame duck session. The economy is slowing, job growth is lagging, businesses are cutting back investments, the uncertainty caused by Tax-Mageddon is contributing to the lackluster economic recovery. Americans' families and businesses are not going to invest in the future if the future holds a $310 billion tax increase next year alone. The best thing we could do to jumpstart our economy is to turn the wheel away from the fiscal cliff sooner rather than later. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Paul Williams, a detailee from the Senate Finance Committee from the Food and Drug Administration, Jesse Baker, a detailee to the Senate Finance Committee from the U.S. Secret Service, Angela Sheldon, a detailee to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Maureen McLaughlin, a detailee to the Senate Finance Committee from the Federal Communications Commission, all be granted the privilege of the floor for the remainder of the second session of the 112th Congress.
Without objection.
With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise today in support of the Food and Drug Administration Safety Innovation Act, which is pending before the Senate this week. This legislation will give the FDA the resources to approve additional drugs and devices every year for their safe and effective use. Without these agreements, the FDA, starting in October, would lack these resources, which are necessary to approve new drugs and devices, and they would also lack resources to monitor the safety and efficacy of those drugs already on the market. This would result in a reversal of decades of work modernizing our drug and device approval and safety programs. I'm particularly pleased that for the first time the generic pharmaceutical industry will provide the agency with $1.5 billion over 5 years for faster product reviews. In fact, the essence of the legislation is that the industry is actually providing resources for the monitoring and for the approval of drugs. Getting generic drugs onto the market sooner will help lower costs for individuals and families, as well as for the federal and state governments. This measure would also significantly improve FDA's regulatory authority, including its ability to help prevent drug shortages and to partner with the private sector to develop new medications to treat life-threatening diseases that have become resistant to antibiotics. And these are very important measures that are included within this legislation. I would like to recognize especially Chairman Harkin and Senator Enzi for their very thoughtful, very deliberative, and extremely important work. They have represented through their committee work sort of the model of what we should be doing here collaboratively and on a bipartisan basis to advance important measures for the American people. They deserve great, both of them, great accolades for their work to date. And I hope we can follow through and bring their work to conclusion. I want to particularly thank both of them, Chairman Harkin and Senator Enzi, for including provisions pertaining to pediatric drugs and devices that I authored along with my colleagues, Senator Alexander, Senator Murray, and Senator Roberts. Again, another bipartisan effort to help improve the health of children throughout this country. Until 1997, and that's just 15 years ago, 80% of drugs were used off-label by children. Doctors were treating children without fully understanding the appropriate dosage requirements or the potential for dangerous side effects. This frustrated pediatricians and angered many families. But those sentiments were largely ignored by the industry until Congress stepped in. With the passage of the Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act in 1997 and the Pediatric Research Equity Act in 2003, 427 drugs have been relabeled with important pediatric information. Now, just 46% rather than 80% of drugs are being used off-label in children. But that number is still too high. The legislation before the Senate makes critical improvements to these laws so that we can further lower this percentage. It would make these two acts, BPCA and the PREA Act, permanent, just like the laws that govern the approval of drugs for adults. It would also provide the certainty pharmaceutical companies believe is necessary to continue to wisely invest in the appropriate use of drugs in children. The legislation will also help ensure pediatric studies are planned earlier in the drug development process and completed sooner. Currently, a disappointing 78% of studies that were scheduled to be completed by September 2007, are either late or were submitted late. While Congress, the FDA, advocates, and industry agree that a pediatric study should not hold up the approval of a drug for use in adults, drug companies should not be allowed to get away with submitting unrealistic study plans to the FDA for approval or failing to complete a required study once they are profiting for these drugs in the market. Mr. President, I note that the Majority Leader has appeared on the floor, and I believe he has a procedural motion. I would yield to him.
Mr. President, if my friend would complete his remarks.
I'd be happy to.
And following your remarks, we'll go into a quorum call. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, that following the statement of my friend, the senator from Rhode Island, that immediately his finishing his remarks, there be a quorum. He will initiate a quorum call, and then I would be recognized when, at such time as we decide to come out of the quorum call.
Without objection.
So I see people shaking their heads. Here's the deal. Senator Reid's going to talk. He's going to go into a quorum call. And when we come out of that, I am recognized. Has consent. Any problem with that, anybody? How much longer do you want to talk?
About 7, 8.
Without objection. Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to continue my remarks on the important topic of the pediatric provisions of the FDA legislation that is before us. And I would simply continue by saying that the legislation that is before us would require pharmaceutical companies to work with the FDA early in the process of developing these drugs to create a reasonable and sensible plan for studying the product in children. It would also, for the first time, provide FDA with an enforcement tool that will deter companies from neglecting their obligation to complete these studies on time. Our bill also responds to the need for the development of pediatric medical devices, not just pharmaceuticals, but devices in children, which can lag 5 to 10 years behind those manufactured for adults. The pediatric profit allowance for humanitarian use devices has proven to be a very effective incentive. 3 new devices have been approved for the use in children in just the last 3 years. This is an incredible increase as a result of this incentive. And this policy has shown much promise, and I'm pleased to see it continue in this bill, along with the Pediatric Device Consortia Grant Program, which has assisted in the development of 135 proposed pediatric medical devices in just over 2 years. The Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act would also extend this humanitarian use device incentive to manufacturers of devices for use in adults with rare conditions. While it's my hope that this policy is equally effective in spurring the development of devices for use in these adults as it is for children, I'm concerned that it could impact the development and marketing of devices for use in children. I plan to monitor this policy closely should it become law, but I have full expectation that both noble objectives can be achieved. There are some children, however, who do not receive the full benefits of the BPCA and the PREA Act. I'm pleased the Senate bill begins to address this problem for pediatric cancer patients and children with other rare diseases. It calls on the FDA to hold a public meeting to discuss ways to encourage the development of new treatments for this population. Indeed, for some pediatric cancers, the treatment hasn't changed in many decades. For other rare diseases, an effective treatment has yet to be found. I look forward to receiving the recommendations that might stem from this important meeting, as well as working with my colleagues to respond to their needs with reasonable and sensible policies. I am extremely pleased that these pediatric provisions have drawn the support of many organizations, 24, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, and also including the Pharmaceutical Researchers and Manufacturers of America. This stakeholder support is very important, I think, not only for the ultimate passage of the legislation, but for its effective implementation. There is another provision I'd like to talk about, and that is this bill contains a provision which will require the FDA to decide whether or not to update the labeling requirements for tanning beds, and I would propose this amendment also. Every day, 2 million Americans visit a tanning salon. 70% of these are young women and women of all ages. According to the World Health Organization, the risk of deadly melanoma increases by 75% when the use of tanning devices begins before the age of 30. So there's a particular concern with younger women beginning to use and younger men beginning to use these tanning devices. Yet the warning labels on tanning beds have not been updated in over 3 decades, and are often placed far from view. In 2007, my colleague, Senator Isaacson of Georgia, joined me in requiring the FDA to study the labeling standards for tanning beds and make recommendations about how these standards could be improved. In its report, the FDA found that tanning bed labels could be clarified and located in a more prominent location, but the agency has yet to act. It is my hope that the FDA will heed its own advice and update the labeling requirements for tanning beds. Similar to the outdated labeling requirements for tanning beds, sunscreen testing and labeling standards have also been over 3 decades in the making. 3 decades. Last year, I was pleased when the FDA finally took action. However, just last week, the agency announced that it would be extending the implementation of these new standards by 6 months until December. Consumers will have to go another summer without knowing whether or not they are truly protected from the sun's harmful UVA and UVB rays. I have filed an amendment to ensure that there are no future delays. I look forward to working with my colleagues to see that this amendment is accepted as part of the final FDA legislation, which I hope is passed very quickly by the Senate. Again, I want to thank Chairman Harkin and Senator Enzi for their extraordinarily effective and collaborative work on the Better Pharmaceuticals and Devices Act for Children, which is included in this bill. I thank them very much. And just for a moment, let me raise another pending issue, which is of critical importance. In 40 days, as I think many of us recognize, student borrowing rates for college will double unless we act. And we have seen both sides of the aisle, colleagues from both sides, come down and say, we cannot let this happen. Well, we can't let it happen. That means we have to take action to prevent the doubling of interest rates on stafford loans. Unfortunately, last week we had a series of budget votes, which most of my Republican colleagues supported, which would have, if they passed, mandated the doubling of the student loan interest rates. So I think we have to move away from this debate in terms of doubling and actually pass legislation which will prevent the doubling of student loans by July 1st. I hope we can do it promptly, certainly before July 1st. And also, I hope that we can find an effective offset. What the Republicans have suggested is using the prevention fund. The President made it clear he would veto the legislation if it included that offset. And also what should be clear is that using resources to prevent disease is not only helpful to the American public, but it's also probably one of the practical ways we're going to be able to begin to bend that very important cost curve going forward. This prevention fund is going to help everyone, but it's going to particularly help middle-income families who are struggling with medical bills, who are struggling to find insurance, the same families who are struggling to pay the cost of college for their children. It makes no sense to me to take from one program that will largely benefit working families to pay for another program that will benefit working families. We have an offset, which is an egregious tax loophole, which allows lobbyists, financiers, et cetera, to create subchapter S corporations to essentially avoid their payroll and Medicare taxes. That, I think, is the appropriate way to pay for this support for student and education. If there are other ways beyond the prevention fund, I'd be certainly happy to listen to them. If there are other principal ways to avoid doubling the interest rate for student loans, let's talk about them, let's get them on the floor, and let's debate them. Madam President, I will conclude, but I would also like unanimous consent that my statement be included as one statement rather than being divided with the colloquy between myself and the majority leader.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. With that, I would yield the floor.
Madam President,
The majority leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the execution of the previous order with respect to S-1387 occur at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, and that all other provisions under the previous order remain in effect at the time. 3187. Yes, 3187.
Without objection.
Madam President, as I sit here this morning, I hope that I'm not disappointed, and I hope the Senate's not disappointed in not being able to finish this FDA bill. We're on the bill. I hope we can work out some finite list of amendments. That would be the best thing to do for this bill. So I just say to everyone, I hope we can do that. I don't want to have to come here tomorrow and file cloture on the bill, but that's a choice I'll have. Or I can, because I can do this, maybe what I might do is move to reconsider the student loan. I can have the ability to do that at any time, so I might do that. We need to get this done. Today is Tuesday, and I just think it's unfortunate. There's an event tomorrow night that we can't get out of. It's been long-standing for the Senate and their spouses. So we don't have a lot of time. So tomorrow morning, if we don't have something worked out, I think we're going to have to do some other things and recognize that all the happy talk on this bill may not come to be. I would note the absence of quorum. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't see Senator Bingham behind me. I would withdraw that, Madam President.
Without objection.
Madam President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Madam President, I thank the Majority Leader for allowing me to speak. I wanted to speak about an amendment which I intend to offer once we do get onto this Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act. This is an important amendment, and I want to advise my colleagues and all who are listening about it so that they can hopefully look into it and wind up supporting the bill. This is an amendment that Senator Vitter has worked with me on, as well as Senators Franken, Shaheen, Cole, Tom Udall, Tim Johnson, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Merkley, Senator Sanders, and Senator Sherrod Brown. The amendment has the strong support of many organizations that are focused on the cost of prescription drugs. Here is a list: AARP, AFL-CIO, Walmart, Families USA, Consumer Federation of America, U.S. PIRG, Consumers Union, Center for Medicare Advocacy, AFSCME, National Legislative Association on Prescription Drug Prices, the Alliance for Retired Americans, various other companies that and organizations. The New Mexico Pharmacy Association strongly supports this legislation. This amendment addresses the root cause of anti-competitive, anti-consumer settlements that are entered into between brand name and generic pharmaceutical manufacturing companies. The effect of these settlements that they enter into is to delay timely access that consumers would have to generic drugs. This practice is commonly referred to as pay for delay, and it costs American consumers and it costs the federal government billions of dollars each year in higher drug costs. According to the Federal Trade Commission, in 2010, pay-for-delay agreements limiting access to affordable generic drugs protected $20 billion in sales for brand-name pharmaceutical companies, and that was at the expense of consumers who would have been able to pay much less for those same drugs. Madam President, ensuring access to affordable medication is an essential aspect of addressing the growth in health care spending. Prices for brand-name prescription drugs have continued to outpace inflation, and overall spending on prescription drugs has also increased sharply. These statistics are amazing to me. The Kaiser Family Foundation found that in 2008, spending in the United States for prescription drugs was $234.1 billion. That's nearly 6 times what it was in 1990. Since generic drugs are on average a fourth the price of their brand-named alternatives, they can be an important source of affordable prescription drugs for many Americans. But to actually achieve the savings for consumers, these generics have to reach market in a timely manner. In 1984, Congress passed the bipartisan Hatch-Waxman Act to create market-based incentives for generic pharmaceutical companies to bring their drugs to market as quickly as possible. The express purpose of that law was to incentivize early generic drug competition while preserving incentives for pioneer companies to develop innovative new medicines. Instead, the pay-for-delay settlements that our amendment tries to address, these pay-for-delay settlements between brand-name and generic pharmaceutical manufacturers have become commonplace. These settlements stifle competition. They delay access to generic drugs at significant cost to consumers and to the federal government. In these settlements, the first filer generic drug company agrees to delay market entry in exchange for monetary or other rewards. And this has the effect of blocking all subsequent generic filers from coming to market. Now, this is a complicated issue. I'd like to take a few minutes to explain how these agreements work and under existing law, and also how our amendment would solve this problem as we see it. Under current law, first-to-file generic drug applicants are rewarded with 180 days of market exclusivity. Exclusivity is awarded only to generic companies who are the first to file. It is not available to subsequent filers even if they are successful in invalidating a patent or are ready to come to market immediately. So subsequent generic filers can only enter the market after the first generic filer has enjoyed its 180 days of market exclusivity. So under the pay-for-delay settlements, the first filer generic company essentially parks its exclusivity. That is, it blocks all other generic manufacturers from coming to market until 6 months after the market entry date. This is true regardless of the strength of the patent or the readiness of subsequent generic filers to come to market. So this means that under pay-for-delay settlements, first filer generic companies receive a reward from brand name companies for delaying market entry, usually a cash reward, a very substantial amount. They also get a reward from the current statute, this 180-day exclusivity period. And brand name companies get to extend their monopolies beyond what was originally intended under the Hatch-Waxman legislation. Consumers are left footing the bill and left with no option but to buy the more expensive drugs and to keep buying it, even after the generic should have come to market. So pay-for-delay settlements are also typically include an agreement that the first filer generic company can accelerate their entry into the market in the event that a subsequent filer invalidates the patent in question. In such cases, the subsequent filer triggers the first filer's exclusivity. Put simply, there is no incentive for subsequent generic filers to fight to invalidate weak patents and to come to market as soon as possible, even when they believe strongly that they could win their case in court. In other words, whereas the original intent of Hatch-Waxman was to reward companies that were the first to file and to bring their drugs to market, currently the reward goes to the first company to submit the necessary paperwork. And bringing the generic drug to market immediately has become an option which can be negotiated away. To fix the pay-for-delay problem, the law needs to be changed so that the first filers who enter into pay-for-delay settlements can no longer block generic subsequent filers who successfully challenge patents from entering the market and bringing affordable drugs to consumers. The amendment that we are offering provides this solution or this fix in the following 3 ways. First of all, the amendment grants the right to share exclusivity to any generic filer who wins a patent challenge in the district court. This means that if a subsequent filer successfully challenges a patent, even after a first filer has entered into a pay-for-delay settlement with a brand name company, that subsequent filer has a right to share exclusivity with the first filer. And this provision provides an incentive for subsequent filers to challenge patents and to stimulate competition. Second, the amendment we're offering maximizes the incentive for all generic challengers to bring products to market at the earliest possible time by holding generic settlers to the deferred entry date agreed to in the settlements that they have signed. Third, our amendment creates more clarity regarding litigation risks by requiring brand name companies to make a decision to litigate a patent challenge within the 45-day window provided for in the Hatch-Waxman Act. This use-it-or-lose-it provision enhances market certainty by eliminating the option for brand names to litigate patent challenges well after a generic has come to market. And finally, I think it's important to point out, Madam President, that the amendment that we're offering does not interfere with the rights of the parties to settle their patent litigation if they choose to do so. There have been numerous antitrust experts and consumer groups that have identified the Hatch-Waxman Act's structural flaw, the one that I've been describing here, as the source of this pay-for-delay problem and have called for a legislative solution. In addition, in 2003, Senator Hatch himself expressed concern that the flaw remained despite an attempt to fix it by including a, quote, use it or lose it provision in the Medicaid Modernization Act of 2003. Senator Hatch emphasized that the law should be changed to reward and not penalize generic companies that successfully invalidate a patent and are ready to come to market. Let me further underscore the need for this amendment with some concrete examples. I've got a chart here that I think will make the point that I'm trying to make. This table shows 3 drugs included in pay-for-delay settlements. And this is just 3. There are many, many of these settlements entered into each year. The delay to market in years for each of the 3 drugs. The 3 drugs are Altace, Lipitor, and Provigil. And the delay period that the settlements called for, in one case 2 years, in another case 1.5 years, in another case 6 years. And the lost savings to consumers, estimated lost savings to consumers. Let me just describe each of these a little bit. The first drug is King Pharmaceuticals' Altace. This is a generic version of Altace, was delayed for 2 years at an estimated cost of $637 million to consumers under a pay-for-delay settlement. In 2007, Lupin invalidated a patent covering Altace. Lupin could not launch or could not bring their generic to market despite being the party responsible for invalidating the patent and opening the market earlier. Instead, the first filer, Cobalt, accelerated its entry into the market and benefited from 180 days of exclusivity. And Lupin was left with no reward despite the fact that they had been the one that succeeded in the litigation to invalidate the patent. The second is a cholesterol-lowering drug familiar to most of us. It is the best-selling pharmaceutical drug in the history of the world, Lipitor. According to a 2008 New York Times report, Pfizer and generic manufacturer Ranbaxy Laboratories agreed to a settlement delaying the entry of a generic into the market by 20 months. The same report stated that the generic version of the drug was estimated to sell for less than 1/3 of the cost of the brand name Lipitor, which had earned $12.7 billion in sales the year before. A letter sent to the FDA Director Hamburg last year by some of my colleagues in the Senate indicated that the federal government was spending $2.4 billion a year on Lipitor and that a generic version was expected to generate $3.97 to $6.7 billion in savings annually. The final example on this chart here that I wanted to mention is Provigil. This is a sleep disorder drug, a generic version of which could have come to market as early as December of 2006. However, due to pay-for-delay settlements, a generic version of Provigil was just entered the market this year instead of in 2006. In addition, in October 2011, a subsequent generic filer, Apotex, invalidated a patent covering Provigil. Because the first filers in this case settled their patent litigation with the brand company 6 years prior, Apotex could not begin selling generic Provigil despite its court victory. Even the CEO of Cephalon, which is the brand name manufacturer of Provigil, is quoted as saying, this is the CEO of the brand name company saying, quote, "We were able to get 6 more years of patent protection. That's $4 billion in sales that nobody expected," end quote. In other words, the Provigil case represents 6 years and millions and tens of millions of dollars in lost savings to consumers. One of the largest of those consumers is the U.S. military. As this chart illustrates, this is an estimate of the effect of this settlement, this so-called pay-for-delay settlement related to Provigil on the Department of Defense. Assuming that a generic version of Provigil would have been released in 2006 with expiration of exclusivity, the Department of Defense alone would have saved $159 million for this drug accessed by almost 500,000 soldiers between the years 2006 and 2011. So had our amendment, the Fair Generics Act, and that is the name of our amendment, we've introduced it as a separate standalone bill, but had the Fair Generics Act been the law, generic versions of Provigil would very likely have been available 6 years ago. The first filers, knowing the patent was weak and subsequent filers could invalidate it and come to market themselves, would have fully prosecuted the patent fight instead of just settling it, as they did. As these examples illustrate, by granting shared exclusivity rights to any generic challenger who wins its patent case or is not sued by the brand company, our amendment will end the pay-for-delay problem and move us closer to the original intent of Hatch-Waxman. That original intent is more competition, greater access to affordable drugs, and substantial savings to the United States government and American consumers. Madam President, I hope when we get the opportunity to offer this amendment and consider it here on the Senate floor and have a vote on it, that my colleagues will support this amendment. It will be a substantial step forward for American consumers and will help us greatly in our effort to reduce the cost of prescription drugs for Americans. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a... Oh, excuse me, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. I'm pleased as well that the Senate is